Okay, Chairman.
Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the March 23rd Sedgwick County Commission staff meeting. So at this point, I'll turn it over to Tom Stoltz, County Manager.
Good morning, Chairman and Commissioners. We have several items today for staff discussion. We'll start off. Glenda has a couple of advisory board appointments that she needs to make in the Corrections Department. She'll start us off. Then we'll go to Lindsay, who will walk us through the analysis of the price of government document that we talked about briefly at the budget workshop. Then we have a vaccine update from Tim, the usual weekly presentation from him, and then Tanya's going to talk about some communications efforts with vaccinations. The landscape is shifting a little bit out there. We need to really begin to communicate and motivate people to think about taking the vaccine. And then finally, Mike and Akeem and Justin will all try to tag team some legislative items and talk about what's going on legislatively this week. So with that, Glenda, if you'd start us off, please.
Good morning, everyone. Good
Morning, Glenda.
Commissioners and County Manager and team. So I have 2 vacancies on my adult advisory board. One is a renewal. Her name's Kelly Grant. And I would like to recommend that we reappoint her for another term. Kelly's done an excellent job on the board, and she wants to continue to serve, and I interviewed her, and she did a great job. So I would like to recommend her for a reappointment. The other is a vacancy that we had, and I interviewed Richard Vargas. Richard applied the last time but wasn't chosen for one of the positions, and he's the only other applicant. He's done a great job. He wants to be on the board, and my recommendation is we appoint him. So.
Okay. Anybody have any questions?
So this is for the adult. What is the name of this again?
Adult. We call it the CAB, Community Advisory Board.
Okay. So I received an email that somebody was having some issues.
Yes.
Applying for the Community Corrections Advisory Board.
That would be this one.
Board. Okay.
And I also got that email, okay. And so Brenda will get a hold of her and let her know how to get in and apply for that. We have another vacancy that LaShonda Garnes vacated and resigned from both boards. So that should be open right now for another application.
Okay. So she will be able to apply for that?
Uh-huh.
Okay. Awesome.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes.
Okay. Glenda, I don't see any other questions.
Okay.
So
thank you.
Thank you.
Glenda, is this for the April 7th board then for appointment? Have you set this for an agenda yet?
No.
Okay, very good. We'll probably set it for April 7th, Commission.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks. Have a good day.
Thank you. You too.
Okay. Next item.
Lindsay.
Lindsay, are you wearing all dark because of the tough game last night?
No, and that was like one of the worst games we've ever experienced.
It
Thanks
was
so
the
much
worst.
for rubbing salt in that wound.
I just was.
I went to bed. I went to bed about 10:30
Okay, all right.
because I couldn't watch it anymore. So
Okay. All right.
thanks so much, sir. Starting
I'm
us off on the right foot there.
I just thought it was your funeral clothes or something. So anyway.
Wow.
Okay. Back to business. Thank you.
You're
welcome.
This one is enjoying that way too much. I will find a way to return the favor
Yes,
at
I'm
some
sure
point,
you
sir.
will. I'm sure you will.
Okay, so let's go ahead and jump into this. We're not going to spend a ton of time on price of government this morning because after your budget workshop, I think a couple of you had asked to actually see the details behind price of government and the computation, and so I have sent around our very detailed spreadsheet showing actual revenues by line back to basically 1972, as well as personal income and population. So all of that information is already in your email, and I'm happy to send that around. But to talk about what this actually is. So price of government is an index that basically says how much of a community's resources are being put toward governmental services. And so there's a book that was written many years ago and updated again. And basically the idea is, how do you manage when you're basically in a state of constant fiscal crisis? That is what generated the rationale behind trying to understand this information. So what it does is it basically takes the amount of personal income. So how much do we all earn in our community each year? And it puts that relative to the amount of revenues coming into the government. And so what this chart shows you here, and I'll make it a little bigger. Sorry, my old eyes are not doing so well anymore. Okay, so what you can see is the blue line here shows you basically what the 25-year average of the county's price of government is. Again, taking our resources relative to the amount of spending or support that the government needs. So you can see that we are and have been, really since the recession hit, we have been close to around 85 cents or 0.85 cents, basically. So it's cents per dollar, which is a really hard thing to wrap your mind around, but we'll get to a slide later that will help frame that a little. So that is where we sit today. Now, how do we actually calculate it? And this is where I said I think we can put some context to this. We take the revenues that we receive from our community. So when it says non-governmental, that means we don't take any grant money. We don't into calculations here. We don't, or into the calculation, excuse me. We don't take into account federal awards. CARES would not be considered in this, for example, because that money would have been money that went to the federal government. And so the federal government would include that in their price of government calculation, if that makes sense. So while GDP would be a better measure because that's output, it's not, that type of information at a county level is not easy to get. And certainly when we do get it, it tends to be about 2 years behind. And so that's not a good way for us to measure it. So this is simply the best way we can for local or state government. So we would take our revenues, which you can see in 2020 across all operating funds, we had about $238.4 million worth of non-governmental revenues, again, meaning money that did not come from a government, divided by our community's personal income of roughly $27.9 billion. And so when we take that into account and we put it relative to essentially a cent, we're at 0.85 cents per $1 of personal income for our community. That's the computation. So why does this matter? Why do we care? Again, because this is a fair way for any government, very small or very large, to be able to say, here's the measure of how much of your resources are going to support your level of service. And what they have found, if you have the opportunity to read the book, is that really it can vary from community to community. Some communities have very high amounts, especially maybe if you're running a utility. Some communities may have lower figures, but it's all about the balance and what our citizens are willing to pay. What the correlation is that they note in this book is that the lower it gets, the more dissatisfied people can be with their level of service. And the higher it gets, people are concerned about the level of taxes or the level of fees that they're having to pay their government. So it's always going to be a balancing act. What they have found is that typically 1 cent is, at least for counties, is kind of a good standard. And so we are at 0.85. And so, certainly we have heard maybe during past budget hearings about concerns about certain types of services, maybe aging services or maybe mental health services. So that may be where some of that tension can come from. But on the other side, you have to be really careful to balance for your community the level of resource that they're comfortable with putting forward. So the final slide that we'll talk about is this one. Again, it's just an objective way of putting our information into perspective. It does not take into account, though, those influences that are beyond your control. And so there are an awful lot of things, especially as we have learned this last year, that are beyond our control. You can't control what the state government does or what the federal government does. You can't control if something like Spirit or Textron has to do some kind of layoff in your community that affects our ability of our citizens to earn. Those types of things are beyond your control. So it's not a perfect measure because there's no way to take that into account here. Are those factors beyond your control? And of course, it's always going to be up to the citizens, up to you, to determine what is best. So again, it's just a measure, it's just an indicator. It's not the end all be all, but it's certainly a good, again, a fair way to look at what types of resources are going into the types of governmental services. And so again, there's no right price. Again, we have seen a correlation at that 1 cent mark, but that number can be defined really for any organization or any community based on the type and level of service that is provided. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions. You do have a handout at your seats that does show the information over time at a very high level. So happy to answer any questions about that as well.
Commissioner Dennis?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Lindsay, and I don't want you to go to a lot of work to do anything on my question, okay? If it's easy, okay.
Okay.
But how do we stack up based on things like the city of Wichita or other counties of the same size as we are in the state of Kansas or even the state of Kansas itself? And if that's a too hard of a question, just don't worry about it. But I don't know how we stack up. I don't know what this means in relation, and even school districts, for example. So that's kind of where I'm coming from.
Well, I think that's a great question. I know Commissioner Howell had asked that a few years ago. The issue with why you didn't get it this time is because 2020 financial reports are being compiled right now. And so as soon as that information is available, I will go and update it and get that to you. I just don't have 2020 information for those entities like I do for us.
Very good. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Commissioner Howell?
Thank you, Chairman. Just an observation on the sheet. And by the way, thank you for the great data going back. Looks like 49 years. That's awesome. Just an observation, though. It looks to me like throughout on the bottom line here, which is 2012 through current, the numbers are fairly stable, hovering around 0.84, 0.86 is the high, 0.81 is the low. But if you go up to the next line above that, you see a lot of dynamic numbers there. And it goes radically up and radically down. And actually, throughout the entire chart, it's very dynamic, and there's lots of variation from year to year. Do you know what's changed between then and now? Why is it so much more stable now?
Well, so if we look back at that kind of second row or second section of rows up from the bottom, we see a lot of variation there because of the arena sales tax that has to be computed. And so that was a 30-month sales tax, and so that is included in our numbers, and you can see that tracks pretty well there. You also will see kind of a distinction when MABCD comes on the county's books because that increases our amount of revenue. And so the reason it has been so stable, though, over the last few years, and this actually speaks to the other long sheet that we looked at. There you go, that exact one. If you look at that, it just tracks nicely with what you can see. We've had really good expenditure control, and the I guess correlating factors that our revenues have been relatively stable through that time, increasing, but certainly not beyond what our community's personal income is increasing.
Well, I just want to say I love this discussion, and I think this is really good data. The community we serve, I think, should be encouraged. I think this is actually great metric for us to be proud of. And I agree with Commissioner Dennis. I think having data from other similar counties, and Johnson County obviously would be another great one to take a look at. Would be I think even further encouraging metrics to understand maybe more deeply. So thanks again.
My
Appreciate
pleasure.
the conversation this morning.
Okay, Lindsay, I don't see any other. Thanks for all the work you and your staff have done on this. Appreciate it.
My pleasure. And I will send you the updated price of government information when we have that info from the other communities.
Okay, thanks. Have a good day. Okay, next.
Tony, are we good?
We've lost our live feed.
Want to take just a second?
make a statement that we've lost our filming or the video?
They can still get audio, they can still hear.
Yeah.
Chairman, we've lost video, but we still have audio, so if people can still hear us, let's go ahead and, if it's okay with
Okay.
you, we'll proceed.
No, sir, we've lost everything.
Oh, everything, okay.
Does that mean on YouTube and everything?
We are no longer broadcasting live on YouTube or Facebook. And I'm working on it. I don't know that I can get it resolved, but I'm trying.
Okay, all right. So are we recording?
I am recording it, so it will be on our website in its entirety later, and I can upload it to the other channels as well.
Chairman, I recommend we proceed. We can put the recording back up later for people too, so we can get, since it's just staff meeting.
Okay. Let's,
I'm talking the whole system in here, Jim. It's not new.
okay. Here we go.
We'll go ahead and proceed in with vaccination update from Tim.
Okay. Good morning, Tim.
Good morning, Commissioners. Tim Kaufman, Deputy County Manager. Got more good news, I think, to report about our vaccine progress. Again, this past week, we've had 2 different sites operating through the help of our National Guard and KDHE, and so we were able to, within the past week, provide 21,921 first doses. 6,266 people received their second dose. So they're fully vaccinated within 2 weeks, and then 100 people received our single dose, 1 dose. And then that gives us a total of 28,287 weekly doses, 30,798 second dose plus that single dose vaccination. So a total of cumulative, since we've started back in December, we've dispensed 103,980 total doses. So yesterday we hit our 100,000th dose through our vaccine clinics, and that is a really impressive number and a testament to all the work that we've had our staff do, and then again the help that we've received from the National Guard has been very helpful. And I know that there's often a question about how many doses have happened in the community. Last week, KDHE delivered some information on Wednesday. They're going to do it once a week, so the number is going to be most accurate on Thursday, but staff and I have done some manipulation based on that number that KDHE issued last Wednesday and then what we've done since Wednesday. And so we have in our community, and this excludes the federal reporters, so it doesn't include the VA and it doesn't include McConnell, but we think that it includes everyone else. 106,565 first doses, so that's all different providers, and then 44,286 second doses, or people who've received both doses or that single dose. So that is a summary of what's happened in the community across the system. And again, that number comes out on Wednesdays, and we work it a little bit, and so Thursdays is going to be the best number. And that's, Tom will have that for his weekly Thursday report to the community, and so we'll start making that a regular report as well. In terms of things that we've got going on right now, we are vaccinating anyone who's in phase 1 through 4. There's still a few folks in the earlier phases that maybe have changed their mind and decided now's the right time to get vaccinated. So those healthcare workers are still eligible to sign up and get vaccinated. Phase 2, a lot of industry. Phase 3, then we introduced folks that are experiencing some kind of a health condition. And phase 4, other health conditions. And then there's some additional types of work, employment categories that were added in phase 3. So lots of different folks. We've got a sampling of the types of individuals that are eligible. And we've got appointments available this week. Many of the appointments have been booked up for Wednesday, Thursday, into Friday. We've got some appointments on Saturday at the library, and then we've got some appointments at Extension earlier than that in the week. And so again, I'd encourage anybody that's interested in getting vaccinated in our community to check with us, to go to sedgwickcounty.org, look at the scheduling tool, and they can get an appointment right there, and we'd be glad to help them with their vaccination. We are transitioning from the K-State Research and Extension Center back to the South Main Clinic at the end of this week, so we'll be vaccinating through Saturday at Extension, and then after that we're going to do all of our vaccinations at the 223 South Main. And we have moved our testing location to the Sunflower Shelter at Sedgwick County Park. So we've got testing available every day, Monday through Friday in the mornings. People can go in without an appointment and get tested. And Kate, are we going to pull up Vaccinefinder? So the other tool that I want to make sure the community is aware of is Vaccinefinder.org. And that is a tool that anyone in the community can use. And if they are concerned about coming to our vaccine clinic, or if they're looking for a specific type of vaccine, this is a tool that the CDC puts out, and it makes it possible for you to search for a vaccine provider. I did this yesterday, put in the courthouse address. There were 31 different vaccine providers within a 10-mile radius. If you expand your search to 25 miles, there were 50 different vaccine providers. And so as you look at the vaccine providers, it will tell you either you can click on that link, and it may take you to their scheduling tool if they're a pharmacy, for example. But it lets you know what kind of vaccine they have. It encourages you to call if you have questions, but there's lots of information. And again, 31 different locations in the community, including the county's vaccine site. So lots of different vaccine opportunities for people in the community. We are not the only vaccine provider. And if people are looking for a different time or a different location, there's certainly lots of options available. Vaccinefinder is a very good tool to use for that. So. Thanks, Kate.
Yeah, that's really good, Tim. Yeah, very helpful.
And then we're doing 2 outreach events this week. One is at St. Mark's today, and then St. James Missionary Baptist Church on the 28th. And as we transition, so we're using our drive-through location and the staff at the drive-through location to do second doses for folks that needed to go through the drive-through. We're going to try and limit our drive-through availability to one day after we get through these second doses. And then we're going to use the team that's working at the drive-through to go do more mobiles. Once we've got once we've been able to ramp down the drive-through location a little bit, we'll have staff freed up that can go out, and we plan to do mobiles across the community. And we're continuing to work with other providers. Again, we saw those 31 different providers. Many of them are pharmacies that are also doing some targeted stuff. So we're working with a lot of different providers in the community to try and get the vaccine out as quickly as we can and as conveniently as we can. And again, to the community, if you need more information, sedgwickcounty.org, COVID-19, we've got lots of information. We've got a link to the vaccine finder. Be happy to answer any questions.
Okay. Commissioner Howell, sorry, I didn't see you earlier.
That's okay. Thank you for the information this morning. I have a couple of questions. First of all, what's the reason for moving the vaccine site away from the extension office?
Primarily, it's so that the extension office is able to utilize that for the things that they need that they've done historically in the past. As we get to the spring season, their activity increases quite a bit. So we're moving to give them that space back.
So if we had another space to do that operation in, would we want to have a second vaccine site?
Well, that's an interesting question. It depends. It would appear that we can handle the volume of both teams through the library site. And again, that second team is only going to be available to us for second doses for another 3 weeks or so. And so at that point in time, we're not convinced that we would have the National Guard here. So if we only have them available for second doses for 3 more weeks, it doesn't seem it's not a good use of our resources to identify another second site. So we're just going to run everybody through the library.
Okay, so again, I think we've said numerous times, and I know we're doing the best we can, and I appreciate all that you are doing. If there's ability to get more vaccines in arms more quickly, and it's a logistics issue, I would like to conquer those types of challenges and get it going as quickly as possible, so that hopefully this community can. Again, we have vaccine still available, it looks like, and again, so the faster we get that out to the public, the better this community is going to have immunity to the virus, obviously. So I don't want our logistics to hold that up. And anyway, so if there's anything we can do to open a second site to expedite that or continue to expedite that, I would think that's probably the right strategy. If it's not necessary because the community's had access and the appointments are not being filled, then I think we need to note that. But I think that may be the point where we no longer really need a second mass vaccination site is when we have unfilled appointments. That's kind of it says we have resources not being tapped. So I don't know. I think a lot of us are watching that website, and even right now, I think there's plenty of vaccine appointments available even today. Right now,
at our second site, we have
so that
appointments available today.
That might be the thing to note here that maybe says we don't need a second mass vaccination site, I guess is what I would say. But if we're filling the appointments, I think we ought to do what we can to get them offered to people. But I happened to notice on Thursday morning you were planning to offer the J&J at the library, and I happened to notice that filled up almost immediately. As soon as we offered that, those appointments were gone very quickly. There were some very late in the day available still, but I think that they said it would be Thursday morning only. Correct. So I think it's likely those late appointments probably won't get the J&J. Do we have any more J&J coming to the county? Do we know?
We do not have any. The last shipment notice that we received did not indicate any this week, and we won't get our shipment notice for next week until late this week. But as far as we know, we're going to run out of J&J through some of the special stuff that we've got going on by the end of the week.
I guess I would just say it seems like there are some people, maybe not a lot, but there are some people that are waiting for the J&J. And I think that when we make that available, we'll see that they will possibly at that point step forward and get their vaccine. So I would like to have that option, as much as we possibly can. You mentioned the 31 locations. I guess some of them may be offering that.
Yes, that was one of the reasons I wanted to show Vaccinefinder, because that does indicate if an entity is using J&J as well. So if people are searching for that particular vaccine, that's a very handy tool to do that.
And since we're removing or we're stopping operations at the Extension Center, are we still going to operate the drive-through for a little bit longer?
Yes. Again, our intent is to scale that back so that we're able to use that team to do some more mobile stuff.
All right. So on the calculations, you said 106,000 first dose. Is that what you said?
Yes.
And if you add in the community immunity from viral infection, which is interesting because Dr. Menz did kind of count that when he was calculating in his numbers what he thought was a percentage of herd immunity. If you want to think of where are we in it as a community, he did count that. Have we added that up again lately to find out where we are based on that type of a calculation?
I did lots of calculations this morning. I didn't do that one. We can do that and send it out.
Well, based on our population, we're probably around 8% of our population. Again, has probably had the virus at some point. Maybe some of them have been vaccinated, so it's kind of an overlapping population. It may not be separate, separate people, but it's interesting that the data seems to be really indicating that we are really doing pretty well as a community. So, thank you for all you're doing, and that's all my questions.
Okay, Commissioner Lopez.
Thank you. So when we talk about the community outreach events, can we also start including, I know Hunter Health has one coming up on the 27th from 10 to 3. They just need to make an appointment through them. Grace Med and Health Corps do weekly Friday clinics for anybody that's open in the phases. Doesn't just have to be their patients, and they can call ahead. I think they can even walk up there. So could we start helping promote those as well, just to show that we have other things coming up besides what we're doing?
Absolutely.
And then I did have a question about J&J. Most of it was already asked, which was great. But if we start receiving more weekly, will we do like we did this last time, where we just have a certain amount of time on a certain day that will be all J&J shots, or?
That's our plan. We would like to be able to get into a pattern. If we know that there's a regular recurring allotment coming to us, we'd like to get into a pattern where we can do that. And we're also going to continue to share it with other providers as well to do some targeted stuff.
Okay. And then my last question, and I don't know if this is the right time or if I should wait until we talk about the legislative stuff, but because it's related to vaccines, I'll go ahead and ask, and if not, we can wait. But if the state's changing this policy where we have to take the masks off, right? And are we going to be able to then open this up to everybody, so anybody who wants a vaccine can have one at that point? Do you know if the state's thinking about just opening this up, or are we still saying some people can't get them and also we're removing masks?
We haven't heard any indication that those two decisions are linked. One of them is a legislative decision that I'm sure we're going to talk about a great deal more. And the other is kind of an administrative decision about working through the phases. So we haven't heard anything that links those two together yet.
Is there any way that we could request that? Because it just seems like if the state is going to now make this decision and not the Board of Health, that it would make sense that we now open this to everybody, so we're not saying some people still can't get the vaccine.
I think that's a legitimate question, and we can ask Dr. Nielsen and go through KDHE and ask that question. Not sure when the governor's going to sign SB 40, but it should be in conjunction with that. Because we have appointments open, even this week, much less next week, I think we might be ready for phase 5. But let's ask that question to the state. We'll do that.
Okay, that's all I had. Thank you.
Okay. Commissioner Dennis?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Tim, I just used Vaccinefinder.org real quick and ran Mount Hope, and I find nothing within 10 miles of Mount Hope. I appreciate what you've been doing, getting the community outreach in a lot of different locations, but I'm still curious about how we're going to take care of the rural portions of Sedgwick County.
We've got two different county departments working on that issue right now. Aging and Health are talking about how they can best serve some of the folks. I don't know how far. We did look up Mount Hope, and there's a pharmacy in Mays. I don't know the distance between Mount Hope and Mays, but that I think is the closest to Mount Hope. So we're trying to work with both Aging and the Health Department to figure out a way to get, again, to some of those more unique situations. Our focus on our staff attention right now is on getting as many people vaccinated as quickly as possible. As we pull people off to do the other things, it slows us down a little bit, but we will get to those rural areas as well.
Okay, but you did brief that we're doing some other locations, and so I would want to make sure that we don't forget our rural citizens that we've got going. The other thing, just to compliment, I continue to get emails constantly about the process on the vaccination at both locations that we've got running. And I try and pass on some of the better ones to you all so that you can let folks know how happy and how proud that we are of what you're doing. But I just want to publicly make sure that everybody understands that we sincerely appreciate the way that you're rolling out the vaccine over at the library and at the Extension Center.
Thank you. We'll pass that on.
Thank you, Tim. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, Tim, don't see any other questions, and I think we all express our thanks to the staff and at both places and the National Guard as well for their help. So thank you. Okay, next item.
Morning, Chairman and Commissioners. This morning I just wanted to give you an update on our communications and media campaign on vaccinations. So again, we are teaming up with communications consultants, Bothner and Bradley, CML Collective, and A, B, and C Bilingual Resources the last two who represent the African American community and the Hispanic and Latino community, to come up with a public awareness campaign and outreach implementation plan on our vaccinations. So starting this week, you will start to see communications in several areas to provide the community with information on who is eligible for the vaccination and where to go to find information on getting your vaccine. And so right now, this campaign will run for approximately 8 weeks. And so we will work with COP Media, and so we plan to do radio ads, billboard displays, and what you see in front of you is our digital billboards. And we are going to add a phone number to this because I see that that's missing, so we want to make sure that we have a phone number on there as well, besides the website. We are going to do some geofencing that will target the minority communities as well as industries that have a majority of large numbers of industries. So we will target some facilities like aviation and manufacturing, as well as construction companies, those type of larger industries. And then we will have some print publications, and let me list those off. We will put some publications in Active Aging, Derby Informer, the Wichita Eagle, Sedgwick County Post, Mount Hope Clarion, the Community Voice, Times Sentinel, West Side Story, East Wichita News, Ark Valley News, Bel Air Breeze, Park City Post, and the Keachai Lamp. And then in a couple of weeks, we'll also have some TV ads as well. We're also going to up our ground game, and we're going to do some flyers as well. This is just an example that we're putting out. We're going to do several flyers. This is an example of what we're doing right now, which is going to be, again, just focusing on eligibility. That's phase 1 through 4. And we're going to put these out in the African American community, Hispanic community, and the Vietnamese. And then we also have in there what we're calling our facts and myths, or FAQs. And then we're going to, again, put out some more flyers as well. And then we're also going to be doing personal testimonies on the vaccines from our residents, and we're gathering those right now at the community vaccination site, So we have some written testimonials right now that we've been putting on our social media, and the communications team just went out this yesterday and also got some video testimonials. So we'll put that out on social media, and then we'll also make that part of our media campaign as well. So as part of this campaign, our first goal is to make sure that the community understands who is eligible for the vaccine. It seemed like the goalpost kind of kept moving with phase 1, then phase 2A, and then all of phase 2, and then we moved quickly into phase 1 through 4. So again, we just wanted to make sure that the entire community knows who is eligible for the vaccine. And then we will work on the messaging to help those in the community on who is, still part of the discussion on whether they're going to get the vaccine. So we'll help them to understand what the vaccine is, what it is not, with simple messaging, informed messaging. And then as Tim just discussed, we want to make sure that we put out messaging on those partner clinics and who are reaching out to the minority communities and those small communities out in the county, those rural communities, and the underserved areas. So that is our campaign on the vaccinations, and so I would be happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Okay, Commissioner Cruz.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you for this update. Can you guys go and show us, okay, the digital, like what are we doing on Facebook? Are we only doing stuff on Facebook? Have we ventured to Snapchat? Have we thought about TikTok? Have we thought about all of these other social media sites?
We've not really discussed Snapchat and TikTok. We can certainly talk to COP Media about that. We're doing like radio ads. We've reached out into Spotify. But if you think TikTok and Snapchat is something that we need to reach out to, we certainly will do that.
Well, we should probably, let's do some research around that to see, the demographics of those sites. I guess I just want to make sure that when we're doing traditional media, that's a lot more expensive than, say, a Facebook ad. And so I wonder if we can get more bang for our buck if folks are spending more time on social media. And so I guess I'd just like to understand that. We did spend, what, $150,000? And so what did we see from that over the last campaign with our CARES money? I mean, have we been evaluating how our ads are doing? Those are some of the things that I'd like to
We
see.
have, I have that information, Commissioner. I don't have it on me, but I can come back and report out on that. It was a good return for our dollars, I can tell you that. But
Awesome.
I'd be glad to give you that information.
Okay,
Yeah.
that's good. Well, and I'm glad that we're really seeing the value of testimonials. I think that's really important. Commissioner Lopez and I had a meeting with Akeem this morning about those flyers and being a little bit more simplistic.
Sure.
I think there's a lot of information on those. And while our government, we're pretty good about putting out a lot of information, I think it's important to simplify those things so it's not so overwhelming for our general public. I mean, we're a society of scanners, so
Sure.
I'd really like for folks to be able to scan that really quickly and tell what it is and why it's important.
Sure.
So those are good. I appreciate the work that you guys are doing. Thanks so much.
You bet.
Commissioner Howell?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I am reflecting on a conversation that we had with Dr. Menz last Tuesday. I made a friendly cookie bet with him. Of course, we're not going to go back and visit that probably, but I think that I was right, that we're moving through these phases rapidly. We said 125,000 people in phase 3 and 4, which technically started yesterday, but we know we backed it up a couple of days. But nevertheless, here we are Tuesday, the day after our planned start of phases 3 and 4, and we have plenty of open appointments right now. So back to what Commissioner Lopez just said, I would like to see us go to phase 5 as quickly as possible. There's Senate Bill 295 in the legislature, which is still a thing, that says we as a county would have permission to roll through these phases when it makes sense for us. It's not the law yet, but it is something that's being discussed at the state level. I would like to implore our community once again to get to phase 5. And I think if we get to phase 5, we'll still see plenty of open appointments. So if that's true, and I'm pretty sure it is true, I think we need to get there. And I think that with that in mind, let's be ready to pivot, because all these flyers I'm looking at right here are complex, as to the point someone just made. They're overly complex. If you're in phases 1 through 4, we're trying to describe exactly who these people are. You got to do a lot of reading to figure that out. It gets to be a lot more simple. You simply say, everyone's qualified. That's a much easier statement. So the faster we get to that simple statement, the bit more effective this is going to get, because you can put that on a bumper sticker. It's so simple that everyone should get vaccinated. So I appreciate, these are great graphics. They're beautiful. I don't know how long we'll need to stay in this world. I would like to get to phase 5 today or this week if we could. And we need to be ready to pivot to a more simple flyer that has a message that simply says everyone should get vaccinated, and doesn't matter who you are, you're all qualified. To me, that's where we ought to be trying to get to. And I think that's just around the corner. I believe I would like to implore us and Dr. Menz and the state of Kansas, let's get there as soon as possible. And I think that's right now. Maybe even, if not today, then by the end of the week. And I can base that on the fact that we have one vaccination site. We don't feel like we need it all that much right now. And we have lots and lots and lots of open appointments. If you look at the website, it's just filled with open appointments. And so if that's our trigger to go to phase 5, we're there. And so with that, I'll just say, love the graphics, but I hope we can get to a simpler message as soon as possible. Thank you.
Commissioner Hall, I might just comment on your word pivot, because that has been, as we have been working with our communications team and COP Media, that has been a word that I have used on several occasions when we've been, working on phase 1 and phase 2A. I have constantly used the word, we need to pivot again, because now we're in, all of phase 2, and now we're working on phase 1 through 4. So I appreciate that word pivot. And we will be ready when we open up to phase 5, all phases, we will be ready to pivot again with the messaging.
Okay, Commissioner Lopez?
Thank you. I had a question. I don't know if maybe you mentioned this and I missed it, but are we doing radio as well?
We are, yes.
Okay.
We will do 2 Spanish stations and an English station, yes.
Okay, yep. I know those are big for the Latino community, is the radio stations. And then are we going to get flyers in schools for them to bring home to parents? Is that something that's...
Commissioner Cruz mentioned that, and I appreciate you bringing that up. We will make sure that we get flyers in the schools, so thank you for bringing that up.
And then I know the Kansas Health Foundation, and when we met with Akeem this morning, we showed him a flyer that they had put out, and it's very simple. And I almost think if we could kind of adopt that, so we can put out similar messaging from every aspect, and it's not conflicting or it's not, completely different, I think would be helpful. And then when we start trying to reach out to these like leaders and communities to get these out to their groups, it's very similar and just cohesive. So might be something to look at there too. But that's all I had.
Okay.
Thank you for
thank
everything
you, and
you're
thank you
doing.
for
I
that
appreciate it.
feedback. We'll look into that.
Okay. I don't see other questions. Thanks for all your work.
Thank you, Commissioners.
Okay, next up.
And then the last thing we're going to talk about, Commissioners, at least from the staff perspective, is just a little bit of a legislative update. And I want Justin to just kind of come up and give us a quick overview of Senate Bill 40 and 286, kind of where they stand in the schedule of things, and they can answer any questions or have discussion past that.
Morning, Commissioners. Justin Wagoner, Assistant County Counselor. I guess first off, I was going to ask if any of the commissioners, I do have copies of Senate Bill 40. I'm not sure if any of you would like to have paper copies in front of you or not. Chairman?
Yeah.
Okay.
I would like one.
All right, we'll get those.
I know you sent something right before, but it's the conference committee report.
And to be clear, Chairman, that is the most official version that we've got at this point. Yes.
That's what the governor will be signing with the lines through it and all that stuff?
It's the most official version I could find on the Kansas Legislature's website. I'm not entirely certain how things work in Topeka when something goes to conference committee, but looking at their website, that appears to be the version that's available. I'm assuming that it shows up in a slightly different format when it gets on the governor's desk.
Okay.
I'll first talk about Senate Bill 40, just to explain. This bill was approved by both branches of the Kansas legislature while in conference committee last week. In terms of timing, my understanding was it was presented to the governor on March 18th. And the way Kansas law works, when a bill's has gained approval through both the House and the Senate, then the governor can either sign it into law, veto it, or if no action is taken, it'll become law after 10 days have passed. And so that date would be, and I've heard through the media reports different things about if the governor's either going to sign it or let it enter into law. I'm not sure which one of those is more accurate. But if the Governor Kelly takes no action, then on March 28th, it would essentially enter into law. It becomes effective, Senate Bill 40 does, upon its publication in the Kansas Register. I would very much presume that any publication of that bill would occur by the end of March, because the governor's declaration of disaster is only through March 31st. I think that was one of the key things in this bill, is that it extends that through roughly the end of May. But what I'm going to give a quick overview on is how Senate Bill 40, presuming it does enter into law, how it would impact the county's public health response. The first thing to know is that it would amend KSA 65-201 to where Board of County Commissioners would have to approve any local health officer orders. And so right now, that's not a requirement under Kansas law. There's really, from a legal standpoint, there's probably two significant changes in terms of the impact, also within KSA 65-201, as to how orders would be potentially handled in the event of any lawsuits. The first of which is the legal standard that would be used by Kansas courts in evaluating the orders would be much different than what's in place now under Kansas law. Under the U.S. Constitution or under the Kansas Constitution, would be a much higher standard than the wearing of masks or social distancing would be analyzed currently. The second key change would also be that there would be a requirement for an expedited court hearing. Typically, when a lawsuit's filed, it may be several weeks or months before an actual hearing gets into court. Senate Bill 40 would require that any local health officer orders that boards of county commissioners would approve would be required to have a hearing within 72 hours of the lawsuit being filed. And that's pretty atypical under Kansas law. It's used for isolation and quarantine type hearings, but not typically for other matters. And so the combination of those things mean that there could be high volume of lawsuits. Doesn't mean the orders couldn't be upheld in court. I mean, that would remain to be seen. But we could anticipate that there would be a high volume of lawsuits that would all require immediate attention and a lot of legal resources, potential utilization of outside counsel, those types of things. And so I hope that helps to explain some of the key changes there. And with regard to Dr. Minz's current order, it's our office's opinion that once Senate Bill 40 becomes law, his order would no longer be in effect because it would not meet the requirement under Senate Bill 40 that it would have Board of County Commissioner approval. That doesn't mean, again, that he couldn't issue an order, the Board of County Commissioners couldn't take action to make that order effective. It just would subject it to the higher legal standard that I mentioned in the expedited hearing that are not currently part of Kansas law, but would be if Senate Bill 40 becomes law. I would remind you, and I think something that's worth noting is all of Dr. Minz's orders that he's issued over the past year, some of those have been challenged in court, or there have been threats challenged. None of them have been successfully challenged in court at this time. So that's a general overview of how Senate Bill 40 would impact health orders for counties. The bill does a number of other things too. I'd be either happy to answer questions on that, and maybe I can address Senate Bill 286 a little bit later.
Okay, Commissioner Dennis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, Justin, I appreciate the update on Senate Bill 40. We set as the Board of Health, so the question that I'm asking is really a Board of Health question. The way that I read Senate Bill 40, they also changed some requirements for school districts. And they kind of fall, the way I read it, and I'm not an attorney, but the way I read it, they fall under the same requirements as the Board of Health, that they could issue orders, and if they do, if there's an aggrieved person, they could then bring the school board to court. Is that not true?
You know, Commissioner Dennis, I paid a little less attention to that part just because of not advising the school board, so I can't recall correct for sure on that. I will tell you that focusing on the county's impact on that, I think that the Senate Bill 40 would adopt the interpretation that the Attorney General's office had in an opinion about the governor's executive order and whether it could apply within schools, to where local health officers would not be able to have orders apply within schools or within colleges or universities or technical schools. So I'm sorry, I'm not aware of how it would impact the schools. I think you're right, because the same standard of review, I think, is also utilized, if I remember correctly, for COVID-19 orders that the governor may issue under the Kansas Emergency Management Act. I think it's specific to COVID-19. Again, I focused on those issues a little bit less because they're, not my client, but I think you're right in terms of how school board decisions would be analyzed, and I think it's similar standard is set for governor's orders.
Well, the way I read this talks about schools, an employee, a student, or parent or guardian of a student aggrieved by the decision of the Board of Education may file civil action in district or county court in which the party resides. So it looks like the language is pretty well the same for school boards as it is for us. And the reason I brought that's a preamble of what I'm going to talk about, okay? I did receive an email from the superintendent Goddard, and he's interested in keeping masks till the end of the school year. By mid-April, over 700 of his staff are going to be having both vaccines within the past 2 weeks before that. The biggest issue is that if they're wearing the masks, they don't have to exclude those students if they come in close contact with someone that has COVID. And if they don't have the masks, they have to exclude those students for 2 weeks. We're 2 months from the end of the school year. And as a result, we could disrupt the education of those students for the remainder of the school year. And as we all know, this past year has been very, very difficult on the students to begin with. I think it should be up to the school boards. As I said last week, I still think it's a school board decision. But my concern is we also have to listen to what those school boards say. They don't want to exclude those students, and the biggest thing they've got coming up is that a lot of things for their seniors, and I have to admit I've got a senior granddaughter in school right now here and a senior up in Nebraska. our seniors are at the end of their time in schools, and there are a lot of events coming up that are going to tremendously impact their outlook on their time in public schools. So this could have a significant impact not only on the teachers, the students, but especially on the seniors that are getting ready to graduate. So I don't know if the legislature looked at things like this, but as the Board of Health, we need to. So I don't know what the solution is.
Well, and Commissioner Dennis, I would say, and again, everything you said, I think those are major considerations that the school districts are going to have to weigh, and I also think they'll have to consult with legal counsel because it does change things for them, and obviously how they will administer things within their school districts. But I do think this Senate Bill 40 essentially requires a hands-off approach for local health officers' orders as they might apply on schools, universities, technical colleges, those types of places. And so, yeah, I think you're right. It does require a lot of consideration and thought for those school districts.
Okay. Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to bring that up because I don't know that we've got any control over it.
Well, if I can just comment before Commissioner Lopez, if that's all right. Yeah, we just went, you make a good point. We just went through a large effort to do high risk and low risk within the school systems. And I thought that was accomplished a lot. So I guess the school districts are now going to have to determine if people are not cooperating or whatever, following their policy, they're going to probably have to classify those kids into the high risk, and which is what they wanted to avoid originally. They wanted to keep those kids in school, so they will be challenged on this, especially on the high risk, low risk world that we just conquered. So, Commissioner Lopez.
Thank you. So I am kind of confused on this because I guess, do you know what changed between last year and this year? Because last year it was stated that, we should, as the Board of Health, locally be able to make these decisions because we have a better understanding and concept of what's happening here versus the state who has to, I guess, manage all the counties in Kansas. Do you know the thinking, or I guess why they would change that from more local?
It's hard to know the thought process that was used. I mean, there's obviously a lot of legislators in Topeka and have many different views. But I think you bring up a point from a policy perspective that part of the thought process, as I understood it from the Kansas legislature after the special session in the summer of 2020, was to not have a one-size-fits-all approach across the state and to allow these decisions to be made on the local level. Senate Bill 40 does still allow those decisions to be made, but there's a very strong disincentive to taking public health measures, whether at the local level or the state level. It really does, it places some pretty high burdens and hurdles on taking any types of actions that go far above and beyond what the U.S. Constitution, Kansas Constitution, or existing Kansas law require.
I guess my concern is if we are going to be held to the same standards as a very small county who doesn't, they just don't have the same issues that we do. So that's concerning, especially, even past COVID, right? If we have another Legionnaires' disease outbreak like we did years ago, with a local health order, we were able to contain that within a couple of hours and make sure that the spread, stopped. So what could this look like time-wise? Instead of it taking 2 hours to be able to control something, are we looking at a day? Are we looking at longer? What is that kind of?
Sure, I'd be happy to talk through how I think that would work after the passage of, assuming Senate Bill 40 becomes law. It requires the Board of County Commissioners to meet in an open meeting. Presumably, there may be an ability to convene an executive session. I haven't analyzed that at this point in time because there would be public health concerns at note and HIPAA and other privacy requirements. But it would have the Board of County Commissioners meet and have to approve the local health officer's order before it become effective. So there would be some sort of foreseeable delay in trying to convene a meeting of the Board of County Commissioners. Senate Bill 40 says in the inability of the Board of County Commissioners to convene. Let's say perhaps 3 or 4 commissioners were traveling, after, let's say budget season had wrapped up and commissioners might be traveling out of state. It does give the chairman, or in the absence of the chair pro tem, can, if they can't convene the Board of County Commissioners, it doesn't set a standard for what that is, so it's a little unclear, that they can approve a local health officer order that either the chair or, in the absence of the chair pro tem could approve that. So it's a little unclear as to how that would work, but it would certainly take longer. I think that's one of the things that's, the COVID-19 in terms of public health powers has been obviously involved more time and duration than the typical, tuberculosis outbreak or, you mentioned Legionnaire's disease situation. These types of situations that may crop up and be more localized where conceivably more prompt action is needed. And so, that is something that I think the county commission and acting as the Board of Health would need to consider in terms of how to be ready for that. At a staff level, I think we'd probably also need to have a plan in place to be ready if we need to act really quickly.
In that case that we had last time, I think it was in a gym, if that's correct, or there was a gym involved.
And I would suggest against getting into too many specifics on that at this point, Commissioner Lopez. And I'd be happy to talk about that more with you in the future. But I think you bring up a very good question. And if you wanted to phrase your question, maybe not in specifics.
Well, not in specifics necessarily, but if we have to close something to stop something immediately, are we now going to be a lot more liable and to be sued by them if they lose a day of business? Or
I think it does make that a higher possibility. Again, as it stands now, I think we've had orders that have withstood legal challenge and could continue to withstand legal challenge absent the passage of Senate Bill 40. It doesn't mean we couldn't. I think it would be unknown. It would be a case-by-case basis for the courts to work out. And so it would set a higher bar. It would certainly be a factor that this board would have to consider and whether to issue, whether to approve a local health officer order that would be proposed. I don't want to say that there wouldn't be any ability to do anything because it doesn't go quite that far, but it certainly, does add some additional factors for you to consider and may negate against, in weighing that, it may negate against taking action.
Okay, my final question is from my understanding, and so please correct me if I'm wrong, so far we have had challenges about the local health order, and we have been able to win those cases. With Senate Bill 40, does that now make it much easier for those to win, where we're going to have to be paying out a lot more? I guess I just want to understand if it's going to be easier for them to challenge us, what we're doing, and win those than what we've seen so far.
Sure. I'll do my best to just speak pretty generally on that question. I think it would make it to where it'd be much more likely that more lawsuits would be filed, probably much higher quality, because the bar to being an aggrieved party is pretty low. I think you could just be somebody who doesn't want to wear a mask, and you could be an aggrieved party conceivably under this act, or under this bill, I'm sorry. And so the threshold of having standing is quite low, and their likelihood of winning would be higher than it is today in terms of prevailing in a case. I'm not really aware of any cases around the country where mask orders, that have met constitutional scrutiny or anything like that, any of those lawsuits that have been successful that have challenged those. And so it would be more likely that we could lose. It's also very likely that we would have a lot more lawsuits because I think plaintiffs would know that. And then in addition to that, there would be the expedited hearings. The hearing has to occur within 72 hours. The court would have to issue an order. I believe it's within 7 days of the hearing occurring. And so we would be having to have many hearings, many potential expert witnesses appearing in hearings. Would potentially have to utilize a lot of outside counsel and outside counsel resources in order to try to uphold the order. And then you also get into, I don't know that it would happen because most of these lawsuits, I don't think would be claiming damages, would be very likely to claim damages. They may try to get attorney's fees or things like that. I can't say what a court would do with those items. There's always that possibility when there's litigation. So it's in part the volume really gets to be the part of it. Because I think it would be a case-by-case basis. And I can't tell you that, I think it's possible we could defend these orders in court if we would do them, and we may modify the orders if that was the will of the board to do that. So I don't want to say they couldn't be upheld in court, but I think they would be much more likely to be defeated in court.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. As a follow-up before Commissioner Howell, it looks like, and I thought when I read before, this bill is really specific to, it mentions COVID-19 a lot. So I think, and I think I saw where, so regular public health crisis can still be under the jurisdiction of the local health officer.
Well, that's a good question, Chairman. Earlier, if you go to section 12, which is where it's on page 24 is where that starts, which is the one that really modifies local health officer orders, it's not specific to COVID-19. But you're right that several other parts of this order, I believe, and I focus a little bit less on how it impacts the governor's powers and things like that, but I think there's other portions of this, perhaps the school portion, I can't remember, Commissioner Dennis may recall more specifically. There's other portions of this that are very specific to COVID-19, perhaps in the Kansas Emergency Management Act or other places. But really the power that through which Dr. Menz issues orders is under KSA 65, and that nothing in that is specific to COVID-19, so it could apply to a different public health issue, months or years down the road that would not be COVID-19 and would have similar limitations that I've been describing.
Okay, well, I guess for our comfort zone and for the future, that's something that we ought to make sure and look into, and if we need to make another legislative agenda for next year, is ask that some of these outbreaks that happen one-off, which don't hardly happen at all, but that the officer still has a chance to quarantine and whatever, not so.
And I would clarify, Chairman, that some of this it's a little unclear how it all would work out. I would imagine that local health officers can still utilize isolation and quarantine powers because they are under separate statutes within Chapter 65. So I think that those actions could still be done. And again, isolation and quarantine is usually for a specific person or group of people, whereas the orders I think we're talking about, and I think what KSA 65-201 contemplates are the broader scale public health orders.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Commissioner Howell, for letting me jump in there. Commissioner Howell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for the briefing. I do have a few questions. In one of your comments you sent to us in an email, you mentioned something about least restrictive means possible, and the health order must be narrowly focused. Can you please explain what you mean by those comments?
Well, I think I was quoting the bill, right. so it wasn't me interpreting it. That was how the bill's worded. And the bill really is carrying over the strict scrutiny analysis that the Supreme Court and other courts below the U.S. Supreme Court utilize in analyzing challenges to actions. And those standards about being narrowly construed and least restrictive means are terms of art that are used in constitutional analysis.
So again, this is just me spitballing my interpretation of that. Let's say, for example, someone claims immunity they say they've been vaccinated or they've had the virus and they have antibodies. And yet we have a mandatory mask order that would order that person to wear a mask. They might make the argument, I have immunity, I don't need to wear a mask. Would that be one of those things that you might see? I mean, is that the interpretation that I would anticipate that would say that's the type of things that end up in court?
I think that's possible, Commissioner Howell. I think one of the things that, let's say the will of the board was to approve Dr. Menz's order and have it be in place. There's a number of exceptions to the mask wearing requirements, 10, 15, maybe somewhere. I can't forget exactly how many there are. There's quite a few exceptions. All of those exceptions would mitigate against arguments that it's not narrowly tailored, because again, it only applies in public, doesn't apply to people in their homes. There's all kinds of exceptions that people can utilize if it applies to them. And so, there are arguments that can be made. And that's part of the point I've been trying to make, is that while I think the volume of challenges would be high and it's uncertain about the success of us being able to uphold those orders in court, there are arguments that can be made against it, that maybe the least restrictive and narrowly tailoring would still be in place, and maybe the order would look different, if that would be the will of the board. I mean, at this point, you have an order in place, and this law is not in place yet, but that would certainly be an option if it was the will of both Dr. Menz and the board.
So just, I guess, follow-up comment on that. I have a couple of other questions still, but a follow-up comment might say that if someone's socially distant, they shouldn't need to wear a mask. Again, I think that that's something that should be stated explicitly in the exemptions list, but that it's not. We talk about socially distancing and wearing masks is a double requirement. But second to that, I think if someone wants to claim immunity, it seems a little strange to that person that the government's telling them they must do something that frankly doesn't really protect that person if they have immunity. So I have some concerns about the exemptions as they're currently stated. I think if we're going to have a health order, we need to actually do some work on making this more tailored and more narrowly focused to people who have actually a heightened risk and people who have a lessened risk. We ought to acknowledge that in our exceptions. So it's just more of a comment. But again, as we think about this and talk about this, I want to make those two comments. Let's talk about the state for just a second. I know you haven't spent a lot of time thinking about the state, neither have I. But I am curious. I assume that Governor Kelly still has an executive order in place for counties that have never really dealt with this. If they didn't change their order in any way, and the health officer didn't issue an order, those counties would still be under a state executive order. Is that correct?
They are, but part of, and again, like you're saying, I focus less on some of the state issues involved. My understanding of Senate Bill 40 is that it would require the governor to reissue any new executive orders pertaining to COVID-19 and get approval of either the legislature or the Legislative Coordinating Council. So what that means for the future for anything like that, I mean, I'd be a little surprised if the governor would be able to get support for an executive order like that, similar to the one you described. But at this point, I'm not sure what's likely to happen on that.
Well, the reason I bring it up is because, again, I agree, the legislature is going to be in session probably through the end of this month, I assume. Then their April break will happen. It depends on when the order would come out. But whether it's the legislature or the Legislative Coordinating Council, there is a second step that has to happen to make that order an official order of the state. And if that was to happen, and in this, of course, Senate Bill 40 becomes law, unless we do something at that point, we would still have the state order at that point. It would become something we would have to contend with in Sedgwick County.
I don't believe so, Commissioner Howell, because I think once Senate Bill 40 becomes law, I think it nullifies the governor's existing orders. So I think
existing order, yes. I'm saying if she reissues
it,
she goes through the process.
I misunderstood. Right. Yes.
I guess what I'm saying, there's a number of counties out there that actually, I believe, have never done something, as a county authority. They've actually gone to, use the state's order as their order for, it's relevant to that county. So I guess my point is, I would expect that she may issue an executive order because again, those counties may not be interested in doing something locally. So again, I would not be surprised if that happened. I just want to throw that out there. And it has become relevant because if that was to happen, I think that Sedgwick County we can be less restrictive than the state, which is interesting because the Senate Bill 40 actually does set that up directly. We can be less restrictive than the state to the extent that the state does have an order. We can make a choice not to do that. But it does take, if we do nothing, again, if Dr. Min's order becomes rescinded through Senate Bill 40 and we do nothing, then there's no health order unless the state does that, in which case then we do have to act at that point to become less restrictive than the state. That's my point.
Sure.
Okay. I understand that correctly.
Yep.
Good. As it's been described, a lot of people have been saying that the local Board of Health needs to essentially receive recommendations from the local health officer. We would consider those policies and we would adopt them possibly or change them. Can the local Board of Health actually initiate actions on our own without the local health officer handing them over to the county Board of Health?
I think the answer to that question is yes in one area. KSA 65-119, I've got the statute here, provides that either it empowers the county or the Board of Health to authorize, they're authorized, both independently, to prohibit public gatherings when necessary for the control of any and all infections or contagious disease. So I think limited to public gatherings, I think the Board of County Commissioners, I didn't see anything in Senate Bill 40 that applied to KSA 65-119, kind of a triggering action for the BOCC having to take action under that would be the issuance of a order by the local health officer. If this board would approve a resolution taking action under KSA 65-119, I do not think it would be subject to the requirements the heightened legal requirements in Senate Bill 40.
Thank you for that answer. I am curious if anyone has spoken with Chief Judge Gehring regarding potential impact to the courts here. Has anybody asked him for his thoughts on clogging up the courts?
I don't know that would be I mean, at this point, I can tell you our office, I'm sure we have not. I don't know if that would be an appropriate inquiry for us to make either. Although I can understand that what you're saying is that there may be a high volume of cases if there was an order. I suppose a heads up, but there probably wouldn't be anything wrong with that.
I guess I'd like to know his thought on this. And also, can people file a civil suit against the county in district court without having to use an attorney to do so?
Yes.
That's also been this bill, correct?
I don't believe it's in the bill. Just in general, parties can represent themselves. A business wouldn't be able to represent themselves without legal counsel, but individuals would be able to. That's under other Kansas law.
If there's a lawsuit that is filed against the county, what is the rule? What's the ruling or requirement for the person that's litigating against the county? Is the health order applied to them in that situation while it's being litigated, or do they have relief until it's decided?
I believe that trying to recall, but I think Senate Bill 40 had some. Let me double check, Commissioner Howland, just to double check and make sure that I'm.
I believe it
yes.
says it.
Yeah. Okay, Chairman. Yeah, it says that I don't think it would include any stay or injunction regarding the contested action, so they would still have to comply with it up until any order that may say otherwise.
All right. Thank you. I probably have other questions, but I'll stop for now. Thank you again, Chairman.
Commissioner Cruz?
Thank you, Chairman. Justin, can you explain how Senate Bill 40 affects a city's home rule authority?
I don't think it affects a city's home rule authority at all. Their authority vests stems from the Kansas Constitution.
So are you saying that cities within counties in the state of Kansas could enact a mask mandate if their body voted in favor of that?
Again, I'm not a city's attorney. I believe the answer is yes. I think a city could pass an ordinance to require the wearing of masks, similar to what City of Wichita did this past summer. So I don't think there's anything in Senate Bill 40 that modifies that in any way.
So really, the authority now, according to this, could rest in a city.
I think that's correct, yes.
Thank you.
Okay. Commissioner Dennis?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let me follow up on Commissioner Cruz's question then. If a city does have home rule, but I don't know that they'd have authority over the school districts in that within the city.
That's a good question, Commissioner Dennis. It's kind of it would be a clash of constitutional powers is what you would get into, because cities' home rule powers are constitutional, stem from the Kansas Constitution. The argument that the Attorney General had asserted in his opinion about how a governor's mask mandate could not apply in the schools also stems from part of the Kansas Constitution. I don't know where that would land. I think it's a good question. I'm not sure what schools would do in that situation. Again, they'd probably have to run that by their legal counsel.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Commissioner Al?
Thank you, Chairman. Businesses and organizations can set up whatever policies they want for their visitors, their customers, their employees. Is that correct?
I think that's correct. I don't think Senate Bill 40 would modify that.
With regards to Commissioner Cruz's question, if a city did pass a mask mandate, can someone in their jurisdiction that's aggrieved actually access district court the same as Senate Bill 40 sets up?
Just to make sure I'm understanding the question, you're saying if a city would enact a mask ordinance, they wouldn't fit under the expedited hearing and all that stuff. There's nothing in Senate Bill 40 that would require that heightened threshold and the expedited hearing that as it pertains to a city ordinance. So it'd just be like a normal lawsuit. But kind of what we've been dealing with for the last year, parties have had the ability to file lawsuits against us.
So this lower standard would not apply in that case in terms of.
That's correct.
Okay.
That's correct. I'm sorry. I didn't.
No, I'm just trying to figure out. Again, we talked about how the standard has been lowered somewhat, so it'd be more difficult for us to win a case like this in district court if it was a lawsuit against the county by an aggrieved party. But that's not the standard that would be used in a city order against someone who's aggrieved in a city.
Certainly, and I guess just to kind of clarify, there's two potential court actions if a city had an ordinance like that. One would be somebody trying to challenge it in civil court and district court, which is kind of what I was answering earlier. The other would be if the city was seeking to enforce it, as a essentially a crime or misdemeanor action in their municipal court, and that would be under, the city would have to prove any case in order to get a conviction to a beyond a reasonable doubt standard, and there's that's a whole other analysis under criminal law as opposed to civil. So there's two kind of different contexts in which those could show up in court.
Would that be municipal court or district court?
It would be a municipal court. The way Kansas law and courts are set up is that usually the ordinances are enforced within the municipal court. They usually typically have a de novo appeal right to district court, meaning a new trial in front of district court, so it could end up in district court.
All right, thank you.
Okay, Commissioner Lopez.
If the cities are now going to be responsible for keeping a mandate or not, if they would like a physician or Dr. Menz or someone to come speak to their city council members, is that something that the county can help with? Because, I've said it before, but because we're the Board of Health, we, can speak to who we want to speak with, and we can get a lot of that information much easier than other groups would be able to do. So if they're now going to be, responsible for this, it just seems like we should hope that they have the same kind of access that we've been granted so far.
And Commissioner Lopez, I saw Tom nod his head, Tom Stoltz, when you were saying that, so I think
I think Dr. Menz has been available all along throughout this pandemic for the city or for anyone that asks questions of him. I think in this case, with what this law change would bring about, I think that makes a lot of sense.
Would it be possible to set up maybe a Zoom for, mayors of cities or in Sedgwick County to get with him to ask him questions? Can we help facilitate that so we can ensure that they have that option?
Okay, sure.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, like you, Justin, I was kind of focused on the county side, but I think we ought to be careful about. I think you've done a disclaimer, but we need to be careful about indicating what cities can and cannot do. I do see on page 20 the extra added E, any party, again, the famous word aggrieved by an action taken by a local unit of government pursuant to this section, blah, blah, blah. This may file civil action in district courts and whatever of the county.
And Chairman, I think that's a very good point to give out. And I will reiterate, not an attorney for any of these places. I'm not a judge who's making an order. I'm trying to answer, obviously, the questions that are coming forward from any commissioners. And I would point out that how that's worded, and I think this is an important distinction, not only with Senate Bill 40, but other, I'm going to talk about Senate Bill 286 here in a little bit. That's only if something's filed under the Kansas Emergency Management Act, I think. So there's certain actions cities can take under that and that counties can take. And again, my understanding, like for example, in the city of Wichita mask ordinance, they did that under their city home rule powers, wouldn't have relied on the Emergency Management Act. I don't believe, I could be wrong on that, but I don't believe that was part of what they did. But you're right, I would caution any cities, school districts, anyone from taking anything I'm saying today as legal advice. It's not legal advice. I'm just trying to answer you guys' questions. So.
Okay, thank you. Well, I appreciate the conversation and all the questions, so I don't see any other questions right now on SB 40.
You ready for me to talk about Senate Bill 286?
I need a cigarette break almost. No, I'm kidding.
All right. You can recess if you want to.
I just thought I'd throw that out there.
Well, I'll give a very high level. I'm not going to get into a lot of details on this. There's a lot to unpack in this bill. To summarize, Senate Bill 286 would establish retroactive penalties. I'm talking about the county piece of this for counties that may have taken action to reduce the spread of COVID-19 in their communities. There's a lot more to it than that. I think Lindsay Poe-Rousseau spoke about the bill a while back. I know, Chairman, I think on behalf of the county, you submitted written opposition to that bill when it was originally heard. And I just want to tell you where that bill's at. At this point, the Senate Committee on Assessment and Taxation's heard from proponents, neutral parties, and opponents on that over, I think, at least three different settings. Yesterday, when they met it on it yesterday afternoon, they ended up, I think there was a consensus reached eventually. Somebody said they wanted to work the bill. And so I looked at their agenda this morning. There's no more comments specifically about when that bill will be heard again by them, although I will say that today, tomorrow, and Thursday, their agenda notes possible actions on bills that have already been heard. So I don't know when they're next going to take that up. It has not passed out of committee yet. There's been a pretty robust discussion from all sides on it at this point. I'd be happy to stand for any questions on that bill because there is a lot to it. So.
Okay, Commissioner Dennis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, first of all, there was a hearing yesterday at 3 o'clock. The sound was terrible, at least off my speakers, so I don't know if that was universal or what. But so I had a little difficulty listening to what they had to say. But let me preface this. I was very disappointed that we didn't find out about that hearing until yesterday morning. We have a lobbyist in Topeka. I know he's conflicted, but even if you're conflicted, you're still going to have to notify the people that you're working for that there's a hearing. So we had no testimony that I saw before that committee yesterday. So that kind of disturbs me a little bit that we did not know about the fact that there was a hearing until yesterday morning, so it was way too late for us to ever get any comments put forward. So what's the solution?
I would first maybe defer to either Mike Pepin or Tom Stoltz on that. I'm not the person to answer that.
Commissioner Dennis, Mike Pepin, County Councilor, as was mentioned, our lobbyist in Topeka was conflicted in this matter. He is very busy working on a number of county issues. Spent 3 hours yesterday on an elevator bill that's important to MABCD and I think some of our county departments. We have a hearing tomorrow on 2 bills very important to the county that we hope to get out of committee. He can't do everything. Maybe as a commission we need to talk about expectations, but he's very busy at this point in the session and he's conflicted and I'm not even sure in this case we could have entered testimony. We sent a letter from the chairman up stating our opposition to that bill, but at that particular time we weren't able to actually come to an agreement as a commission of somebody testifying against that bill or presenting testimony against that bill. And then this has been a strange hearing process where this hearing just keeps getting continued. We weren't even sure we could enter testimony since we didn't enter it initially or get on the witness list as an opponent, whether we could have even jumped in at that time. But that's where we are at this point. If it gets out of this committee, which we're not even certain at this point, and gets to the full Senate, then we'll have an opportunity, hopefully, in the House to come to a conclusion as a body of who should testify against the bill and appear before the House Tax Committee. But that's all I can say at this time.
Well, somehow we need a process where that we know when there are bills going to be heard by the different committees up there so that we can provide testimony, and we need to know early enough that we can get the testimony in. I did not hear it, and again, the sound was terrible yesterday, but I did not hear that they had our letter from the chairman even that they were reviewing when she was looking through her notes. So that's a concern. What statute did we use when we shut down? We did not use the Kansas Emergency Management Act, correct?
That's correct, Commissioner Dennis. We used KSA 65-202 and KSA 65-119. Do you want me to elaborate on that, Commissioner Dennis?
Yeah. What's the difference between the different statutes and what's the impact of us using different statutes?
I think that's a good question. The Kansas Emergency Management Act, there's a statute, KSA 48-933. There are certain circumstances where if an order is issued, or I'm sorry, if action is taken by the governor, county, city, in which property is commandeered or used to cope with a disaster, there can be a requirement that compensation be paid to that property owner. But it's very important to note that in that statute, it specifically says for actions taken under this act. None of the actions the county has taken, when I say the county, I mean Dr. Menz, none of the orders Dr. Menz has issued have been under the Kansas Emergency Management Act, so they don't meet the threshold. And I think it's important to note, I mean, there's a lawsuit that's been used, mentioned in the committee hearings, I think mentioned in the media, other places, that's filed here in Sedgwick County, in this court. It's not against Sedgwick County. It's against the governor. It doesn't name the county. There hasn't been a judgment. And I think that that's telling. And so that lawsuit has been used as kind of a justification of sorts for why the Senate Bill 286 should be passed, because it would be some sort of a settlement process is what it contemplates. And I guess the point would be that there's been no judgments. There's been no court opinions in Kansas I'm aware of that has said the response to COVID-19 is using or commandeering property. And in Sedgwick County's case, our actions weren't even under the Kansas Emergency Management Act. And so I don't think that lawsuit that's been filed, it's nothing more than a claim at this point. There's no judgment. There's no damages that have been granted by a court. So.
Very good. That's all the questions I have now. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Commissioner Cruz?
Mr. Poon, can you please explain what are the requirements for submitting written testimony? Is that a vote of the majority?
What we have been doing you can submit written testimony as a commission. It needs to be into a committee 24 hours in advance of the hearing. And we typically, as a commission, will vote on that. But more often when we've been doing this, we actually get one commissioner that agrees to testify on a bill and as part of submitting written testimony, and will also be on a committee's list to either be a proponent or an opponent of a bill.
So these are pretty important things that are happening at our Kansas legislature right now. And so I have to agree with Commissioner Dennis that the fact that our lobbyist, who we pay to inform us of these things, was too busy. I get it. You can't do everything. But I think when things like this, of this nature, could impact us in such a way of cutting 26% of services, I think it's pretty important that we have a conversation around this. So I don't know if my fellow colleagues agree, but I think this is something that we should talk about at a staff meeting and see, like, what are the requirements and what are our expectations? Is that something that we could put on a calendar?
Yes.
Thank you.
Commissioner Howell? And wait, Commissioner Howell, just 1 second. Mm-hmm. I think also because we were in a time crunch on my letter because we were late on getting the letter to the timing you talked about, but I recall that letter got sent individually to all individual members of that Senate committee.
That's correct.
So just like other commissioners can also send a letter of support or proponent or opponent on, as has happened in the past. So I thank you for explaining as a group, and as a group, that's what we wanted to do. But I took the extra step and sent it directly to each member of that Senate committee.
So, Chairman, if I may follow up to that. So I did watch that hearing yesterday, and our letter was not mentioned. Was it mentioned? Did I miss that?
I would assume it was not mentioned, Commissioner Cruz, because I think we discussed Senate Bill 286 in that hearing at a staff meeting on a Tuesday morning after 9 o'clock. The hearing was at 9 o'clock on, I believe, a Wednesday morning at that time. So we, at that particular time when we were discussing the bill, did not have time to submit official written testimony. If you don't submit written testimony, it's not going to be read into the record. That's why Commissioner Dennis did not hear that there was written testimony on behalf of Sedgwick County in the record. But we decided at that public hearing, commission hearing that day, to go ahead and submit testimony or send a letter on behalf of the commission by the chairman to each committee member expressing our opposition to that bill, and that's what we did. Every committee member has a copy of that letter, or should have had a copy of the letter, and known the position of Sedgwick County. It's just it wasn't an official record for the committee. That's where we stand.
Commissioner Howell?
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would like to point out, what do we pay to KAC each year? Does anybody know?
Pay what?
The Kansas Association of Counties. I think it's 10,000 or more. I'm not sure the number, but it's up there, maybe more than that. The KAC puts out an alert when these types of bills go through the process, and so if you get those alerts, they are very informative, and they are also our lobbyist, lobbying on behalf of all Kansas counties. And I believe that Jay Hall, I think that's our lobbyist name that does that. He testifies on these types of bills, and I went up there and testified on previous legislation. He also was there testifying on that legislation on behalf of the KAC, which is also on behalf of Sedgwick County. I'd like to point out that, again, although Jason, our lobbyist, is conflicted in this particular bill, he's doing a very good job on many other bills, and I think he's doing a tremendous job. He has disclosed that on the front end because he does lobby for maybe the other side of this particular bill on behalf of one of his other clients. And so this is very unusual. It happens once in a while. Lobbyists do have this type of conflict that happens. They have to disclose that so their clients understand what they're doing. But I think he's done that, and so I think that I don't want to criticize him because I think he's done his job. But let's just be clear. Senate Bill 286 had its first hearing scheduled on March the 11th. This was a couple of weeks ago when you testified, when you sent that letter up to the legislature, those members. And again, we missed our opportunity at that time, but we did send that letter out to every member of that committee, and they all got that. It wasn't read into the record. It wasn't discussed at the hearing, but I know they got it, and that was something we did. But they had so many proponents on this bill, they actually had to split the hearing up into multiple days. And so what happened yesterday was a continuation of a previous hearing. It wasn't scheduled specifically, it was a continuation of the same hearing. And if you don't put your testimony in before the hearing begins, you can't add testimony during the process of the hearing. It's not allowed. It's called the legislative process. And so yesterday what you heard was the opponents, but they had to submit their testimony and sign up to speak quite a long time ago, actually. So this process is the way it works, and it's up to us to understand this is the process. I know it's very dynamic and things change quickly. It's up to us to have someone who's monitoring legislation and monitoring these things. I monitor this numerous different ways. I know a number of us, our legal office, or legal folks in the legal office and maybe communications are also monitoring these bills, and things just happen really rapidly. We can't complain that we don't like the legislative process. It is what it is. I think it's up to us to understand it and to take advantage of the opportunities as they come to us. But I don't want to criticize our lobbyist. He's doing a tremendous job. He's disclosed what he has to disclose. And by the way, he sent us an email on March 22nd describing this bill and letting us know it's going before the committee and where it is. So he's still communicating with us on this bill. So with that, I think that it's a lesson to be learned. We can do better probably, but I don't think it's necessarily for us to point the fingers at other people that are doing their jobs. It's up to us to figure out how this works. And that's all I'm going to say. Thank you.
Okay. Commissioner Lopez?
Well, thank you. My question is, how transparent is this going to be? Because if this is just going to be determined by our AG and it's not open to the Open Records Act, I mean, it seems like this could potentially turn into an ethical issue of why some got it, why some didn't, how much. I mean, is there going to be any transparency on this if this passes?
You know, Commissioner Lopez, I think you raised a good question and point about the bill. The way it's worded is when a business would submit their application seeking the relief under Senate Bill 286, the way that would work is that document is submitted to the Kansas Attorney General's office and is shielded from disclosure under the Kansas Open Records Act. So there really is no way to have oversight as to what occurred, and I imagine the only way those documents would be found would be if a lawsuit was filed and discovery, something along those lines.
Okay, thank you.
And as a follow-up, when they file that to the Attorney General, then the Attorney General determines if there's a, what's it called?
Yeah. The way it works is, and Lindsay can correct me if I get any of this wrong. I know she did a very good and detailed presentation a couple weeks ago on this. But they would submit their application, essentially requesting relief. It has the Attorney General review the merits of the claim and the use involved, almost acting like a court, and then would certify how much relief they're entitled to, kind of like a judge, and then they would submit that to the county, Board of County Commissioners, and the act says, or the bill says that we shall grant the relief. So essentially, it's a determination made by the AG that statutorily we would have to follow. So yeah, that's how it works in general. And Lindsay, if there's any clarification that's needed, okay, she's giving me a thumbs up. So.
The applicant, though, can, if I recall, can submit their application and say, I would like relief from the state fund.
Correct.
Or from the county.
Correct. There's a few different ways that they could do it from. They could do an income tax relief claim. They could do a property tax relief claim, that geared more towards counties and property taxes.
Right.
They could also request their claim come from, the bill talks about setting aside $100 million in federal monies.
Right.
From what my understanding is that there may well not be $100 million from the federal government as part of the recently passed act that isn't already earmarked for other purposes. So there may not be that pool of money, but essentially it would leave it up to the business that would seek relief to claim which one of those they may wish to go under, or they can file a lawsuit under the Kansas Emergency Management Act, just like they can do now under law. And then it contemplates the AG kind of settling these lawsuits on behalf of, I guess, the state or the counties. It's very atypical. These are things that usually are handled in court right now under the law. So.
Okay, thanks for clarifying. And Commissioner Howell?
Thank you. Just one more comment on the legislative process. This is an exempt bill because it's in a tax committee. It does not follow the deadlines of other bills that don't have that exempt status. Having said that, it's actually very, very late in the session calendar, legislative session calendar, that this bill is actually being heard in the Senate. This is a Senate bill, and this is a Senate tax committee that's doing the hearing. If it passes, well, first of all, let me just say this: the hearing is all we've had so far. There's been no work on the bill, and I would expect extensive amendments on this bill. One of the amendments I anticipate they're going to have to debate is whether this is retroactive or just prospective. I have no doubt that's going to be a huge debate going forward. But if it does pass the Senate committee, then it's got to pass the Senate, then it's got to go over to the House, and it's going to start the process over again. We can also engage the hearing in the House when that happens. I'm sure we will. But then it's got to pass the Senate and the House committee, probably have more amendments added, and pass the House with more amendments added, and probably go back to conference committee. This is very, very early in this bill's life, actually, even though it's late in the session. Not saying it can't pass. I expect it may pass in some form, but the form we see today is probably not the form it'll end up in, is my point. And so how this works at the Attorney General's office is really not our business. I don't know that we can get into the details exactly how he's going to do his job. I don't know that we can get into that. But our biggest concern, I think, from a county commission's perspective is what fiscal impact does this have on our budget, and how are we going to deal with the retroactive penalties in this bill? That's my only concern. And I think that we need to be focused on that. I want our businesses to be successful. I want them to be to take their damages and actually have those things dealt with some way. I think those are good ideas. This is a very popular bill. I would say, I guess as a final comment, I do think that the state is for some reason very, very much focused on local government when they ought to be focused on their own budget. Let me just remind everyone, they also levy 21.5 mils of property tax as the state, whereas we levy 29 mils, and so they're not much behind us. We run basically all of Sedgwick County government with 29 mils, and yet there's been no discussion about the state giving businesses relief with their own tax levy on businesses. And I think if they're going to make that their focus, and essentially, again, to quote Senator Stephan, to punish counties and make us learn our lesson, I'd like to just make sure that he understands that there is another side of this story, that they also should take the same action for themselves. And I think that needs to be something we state more clearly as we go forward. I'll leave it with that. Thank you so much.
Okay. Thanks for clarifying that process. You're kind of our resident, how that stuff churns through. So thank you for explaining. Commissioner Dennis?
Thank you. Real quick, I know that we're supposedly out of this last fund that came out of the federal government, we're going to get somewhere around $101 million, divided up into two different chunks, $50 million each year for the next 2 years. I know that the past bill that we had with $99.6 million had a lot of strings attached to it on how that we could spend that money. And by the way, as it went forward, why it changed about every week. One of the questions that I've been asked is, can we use the $50 million that we get out of that relief funds to be able to pay the property tax and so forth?
I'll let Lindsay address that question.
So that's a really good question. Under the letter of this bill, it says it must come from the state or from the county's general fund. And so we would have to figure out if there was a way to get some of that $50 million into the county's general fund. Like you said, there's a lot of strings attached. There are strings attached to CARES. My understanding is there's going to be even more strings attached to ARPA. Without having guidance, it's hard to say right now if that would be a legitimate way to do that. But right now, as it stands, no.
Well, thanks, Lindsay. One follow-up on that. Say that this passes in some kind of form that it's in right now, and we do have to return property tax funds, and that's what I understand this is all about. Does that include the 21 mills that the state taxes? Do we have to return the 21 mills?
So it's a bit ambiguous in the bill, but my understanding is yes. It would be for any property tax that was paid is how it's worded, which looks like that old House Bill 2142. And so, yes, I believe we would have to refund any property taxes paid by that individual, regardless of who that money actually was really paid to.
So they're going to penalize us, and yet they're going to keep the 21 mills. Very good. Thank you.
Commissioner Lopez?
Thank you. One thing that we've talked about, if we don't take the cut, if we don't do the cut for 27%, sorry, Lindsay, what does that look like for our taxes? If we have to raise our taxes to pay this, what does that look like for people?
Well, so unfortunately, the way this is written and the way state budget law works is if we must pay this out in this calendar year, there is no opportunity to increase taxes for this calendar year. That ship sailed last year. So we would have to find the budget authority somehow. So that's why we think it would be necessary to do these large service cuts. So that would happen for calendar year 2021. Then, of course, as part of your 2022 budget discussion, we would need to talk about how to restore that money back to, what a reasonable level in order to conduct our business. So if you're talking about a mill levy rate increase, to generate that amount of money, 1 mill is worth roughly $5 million right now. And so when you're talking a $25 to $50 million cut in services, that's a 5 to 10 mil increase just like that to replenish that funding. Because we've already spent that money on services.
And can you just remind anybody who's watching again what we pay with that general fund?
Absolutely. So I actually have made copies of a section of our quarterly financial report, which is available out on the website. The biggest bulk of our expenses within the county's general fund is the sheriff's office. And so when we talk about a 26% reduction, the chairman had asked, what does that look like for some departments when he was doing his testimony earlier? And so in the sheriff's office, a 26% reduction is equivalent to basically 144 staff. 144.
And what's their FTEs now?
553. So in 911, that's another big one that's paid for out of the county's general fund, the call takers. That would be 27 of their 104 staff. Because those entities are primarily, like most of us in government, that's mostly personnel, right? We provide service. We don't build widgets. And so those would be probably the biggest areas where we'd see increases. Other things that are funded, a lot of our public safety, district attorney, all of us, finance, HR, IT, some of those core fundamental things, parts of corrections, Zoo, Exploration Place, some of those quality of life things are parks. There's 40-some departments that are funded with the general fund, so it would touch almost every area of service that we do, without a doubt.
Okay, and I don't know, this might be for you, Justin, but this also includes when we are paying people back, Walmart, Target. This is not excluding them. This is everybody. Is that correct?
Commissioner Lopez, I think that's a good point. Yes, the bill, the property tax portion of this bill, there's no threshold required that the business, had worse income or sales than they did before COVID-19. You could have big box stores that may not have, may have had good sales actually during COVID-19, or may have had similar sales and they would, as far as I understand this bill, I think they would still be able to qualify for potential relief. There's really no limitation. The bill essentially makes any restriction on capacity able to be something that could be a claim, or even having a mask requirement in place after May 1st is also something that can, May 1st of this year. That part is forward-looking, would require, it could end up causing that penalty provision to come into place to where the counties would be responsible for refunding taxes, essentially.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Commissioner Cruz.
Thank you. So the discussion we're having around cutting staff, if this passes, essentially when we're cutting 144 positions out of our sheriff's office, when we're cutting 27 positions out of our 911 service, so essentially the state legislature is defunding our police here. They're defunding our services for 911. That's really just a statement that I'd like to make, because that's essentially what the Kansas legislature is doing to Sedgwick County right now if they pass this.
Okay. Commissioner Howell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to, just for anybody who's interested in what a mill is, on a $100,000 house, 1 mill is $11.50 in tax per year. So 5 mills is right at $57.50, and 10 mills is $115 on a $100,000 house. I don't personally think that's the way we should go as a county. I don't think that I would support that. In terms of cuts of service, I know that would be very, very difficult to do, but I think we're going to have to have that discussion at some point. But I guess the one question I would have right now is, what is our ending balance right now, and is there any way that money could be used to actually provide this
So I don't have our official ending balance, but we'll have that soon because we're going through audit. It was significantly increased in 2020 due to the personnel reimbursement that we were able to do. But as you'll see in the agenda item that's on consent tomorrow, we're anticipating spending a significant portion of that on the COVID response this year. And certainly, as you've seen in our long-term forecast, we're already projected to fall below our balance. Now, technically, yes, we can access that balance. But in order to have the budget authority to pay it, it's again that state budget law, we would have to either go through and re-adopt a budget to increase budget authority to then access that balance, which creates significant issues for us, for credit ratings, for audits, for things like that. So it's not really a desired path, but yes, it would be an option.
And I know there's a bottom threshold we don't like to cross, but in this case, would we be able to cross that threshold if we needed to, if we went through that process?
So the policy right now states that if we do dip below that, we need to have something in place to correct the balance within, I think, I'll have to look at exactly how many quarters we have to correct that issue.
Well, again, I'll just speak as a single commissioner, but I would rather, focus on, if I had to solve this today, based on what we know, I would prefer to somehow deal with our expenditures and possibly use some ending balance to solve this. But I do anticipate there's going to be significant amendments on this bill, and I don't know that we're going to see it come out the way it is currently worded. So I think we need to understand those are all the options, though. The options currently is ending balance, complicated, not really a great idea in terms of credit rating, cuts in service, or potentially tax increase that It was already previously mentioned, so people understand those levels of pain, and that would be borne by the people of Sedgwick County to make that payment. Okay.
And Commissioner, if I could just
Sure.
make one not really a correction, but just a clarification. If we access that balance and we fall below our levels, then we almost are forced to do a tax increase in order to correct it in a future year.
Yeah, and by the way, it's also interesting, at the same time the legislature is doing this bill, they're also pushing out bills like Senate Bill 31, which essentially forces us not to increase our budget. I mean, so
Yes.
you think about it, it's interesting. They want us to spend money we don't have, and yet they don't let us create, budget authority to go and make the payments on this, on Senate Bill 286. So it's a, to quote my wife, it's a quinky dink. I don't know how you deal with it. All right, thank you.
Okay. And Commissioner Lopez.
Just have one more quick question. And I think it's important to really kind of look at what that could potentially look like. So has the sheriff or 911, have they said anything on 911 wait times, what could that go to? If a sheriff needs to respond to someone, how long could people be waiting? Does that open us up to liability if somebody dies because we can't answer their 911 call right away? Are we now going to be open up to, wrongful death suits, or what does that look like? Is that a potential?
Well, I will defer to Mr. Papoon or Tom in terms of liability.
I don't know if they've had a chance to even look within their operations. I don't know what Allura would do with 27 position cuts, quite frankly. We could not, we struggle there currently with staffing, with keeping up with the demand. And I might add that during the pandemic, this demand has gone up. So I don't know that she's looked technically at what she would do inside of her organization, same with the sheriff. We could shut down wings of the jail, because this wouldn't just be his field response. This would have to bleed over to his detention component, and what that means to the court system and what that means to culpability, liability to the county. As this plays forward, I will have them look at that if that is what reality is appearing to be. So, you want to comment on anything else, Mike? Okay.
All right, thank you.
Okay, I don't see any other comments. Healthy discussion again. So what else do we have, Tom? That's it? Okay, Commission, we have a meeting tomorrow, and so we will be adjourned of this today, and have a good day, and we'll see you tomorrow.